Well, welcome. This is the first in a series of shorter devotional type recordings I'm going to be making so that you don't have to commit to 15 or 20 minutes to listening to something, just to get some good, encouraging teaching regarding sacrosexual living. The first one is called Clothed in Righteousness. Let's start off with the words of Jesus Christ. Matthew 5:6, he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." I want to briefly talk about what righteousness is and what the implications of that are relating to holy nakedness and to sacrosexual living. In the verse quoted above, the Greek word translated righteousness is dikaiosune, which in broad sense means the state of him who is as he ought to be, the condition acceptable to God. Of course, one immediately thinks of Jesus himself as the only one who was ever on earth that was perfectly righteous. But there are two other people who, if only at first, were also perfectly righteous, and that would be Adam and Eve. Before the fall, it happened in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve were sinless and righteous before God. They were directly created, quote, as they ought to be. They were without sin, clothed only in righteousness, and without physical garments. After their sin, all of that was lost, and they attempted to cover themselves with fig leaves. God rejected their vain attempt at hiding their bodies, which had lost their garments of righteousness, and made for them clothing out of the skins of an animal. This pointed to the sacrificial system that would be in place until the coming of the seed of Eve that he talked about to crush the serpent's head and restore our relationship with God. Well, you might say, that's all well and good, but what about now? Don't we still need to be covered? Would you concede that if we have righteousness from God once again, that physical clothing would no longer be necessary? Then first of all, let's look at how God describes our attempts at restoration of righteousness done on our own. Isaiah 64:6 says, "But we are all like an unclean thing, and all of our righteousnesses are like filthy rags. We all fade as a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind have taken us away." Now, that's not a pretty picture. All of our attempts at righteousness via self-improvement are like filthy rags. This is also fitting because clothing ourselves started from a position of shame, and nothing holy is rooted in shame. Let me say that again. Nothing holy is rooted in shame. Self-clothing is based on self-loathing. With that in mind, how can we be clothed in righteousness once again? Well, thankfully, Jesus is our spiritual tailor. Look at what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. It says, "For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him." Because of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, we can once again be clothed in righteousness and not fabric. We rejoice that his righteousness is all we need to clothe our bodies. Isaiah looked forward to this reality when he prophesied, "I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decks himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels." That's Isaiah 61, verse 10. Does this apply to Christians today? Well, of course. In the New Testament, we are repeatedly told that the church is the bride of Christ, who is the bridegroom. Now we're free to live this glorious truth out before others as a testimony that our relationship with God has been restored. Think about what Romans 6:18 says, and I'll add my commentary in here. It says, "And having been set free from sin," see, that's shown by covering ourselves, "you have become slaves of righteousness, sown by being naked and unashamed." Hope you enjoyed this. I know it's short, but it was supposed to be short. I'll post some more of these short devotionals as we go along, and please let me know in the comments if you liked them and if they were helpful. Thanks.